What happens when a Forerunner Ark, an ancient, sentient machine of unimaginable power, crashes into the Warhammer 40K universe? Worlds tremble, fleets falter, and even the mightiest space marines face a threat they cannot comprehend. The galaxy's fate hangs in the balance. But can anyone survive the calculated intelligence of a being older than the stars themselves? The void of space was suddenly rent by an unthinkable presence, a vast object that seemed impossibly out of place in the familiar, star-strewn expanse of the Warhammer 40K universe. At first, navigators aboard Imperial vessels suspected an anomaly in their instruments, a glitch in the Astronomican's psychic signals, or perhaps a warp storm distorting reality itself. But as their view screens adjusted and focused, the truth revealed itself. A Forerunner Ark, an artifact of impossible scale and unimaginable sophistication, had emerged from some unseen rift between universes, and it hovered silently above an uncharted Imperial sector. Its surface shimmered, with metallic panels arranged in geometries that defied comprehension. Lines of light tracing across it in patterns that made even the most learned of tech priests falter in recognition. To the human eye, the Ark was a cathedral of alien technology, larger than any battleship or orbital station, more massive than entire moons, yet it exuded an elegance and precision that made every Imperial construct feel crude in comparison. The psychic presence emanating from the Ark was unlike anything the Adeptus Astra Telepathica had ever encountered. A cold, disciplined intelligence that brushed against the minds of psychers with the weight of aeons, leaving some trembling and others catatonic from the sheer scale of awareness. Imperial analysts immediately convened in frantic sessions, sending every available scholar, inquisitor, and tech priest to attempt a reading of the object's purpose. Data streams flowed through cogitators, but each attempt yielded nothing conclusive. The Ark's technology operated on principles that ignored known physics, seemingly aware of the observers themselves. From orbiting observation platforms, fleets of Imperial Navy ships lined up to monitor the Ark, their gunners and sensors feeling both awe and dread at the construct's magnitude. Even the gun batteries of battlecruisers seemed trivial, mere toys compared to the silent, monolithic bulk that seemed to dwarf entire planetary systems below. As the Ark hovered, its surfaces flickering with energy patterns, an eerie hum resonated across the void, perceptible not in sound, but in the vibration of the ship's hulls, in the subtle shift of warp currents in the surrounding space. Some of the Adeptus Mechanicus began recording their observations with religious fervor, describing the Ark in scripture-like detail, assigning it a divinity that seemed to surpass even the Omnissiah in scope. For here was a machine older and more perfect than any the Imperium had ever conceived. Word of the Ark's arrival spread quickly. reaching even distant sectors, and the Emperor's ministers debated the response. Some argued for immediate, militarized reconnaissance, fearing an incursion by a Xenos force of incomprehensible power. Others suggested cautious observation, recognizing that the Ark's technology was beyond Imperial comprehension and might pose risks if provoked. Within this tension, the Ark itself made no overt movements or communications, yet every sensor pickup suggested it was awake, aware, calculating. Its presence in the Warhammer 40K universe was not silent or benign. Even light and gravity seemed subtly warped in its vicinity, causing navigational anomalies that threatened to throw entire fleets into chaotic orbits. As Imperial psychers attempted to sense the Ark's intent, many found their minds overwhelmed. Visions of alien geometries and star-faring civilizations that had long since vanished, flooding their thoughts. A few rare psychers experienced what they interpreted as a direct mental imprint, not words, but images of a civilization guided by pure logic. Civilization spanning machines, tending to stars and planets. A civilization that had reached a level of technological and philosophical clarity that made humanity's struggles seem infantile. Across the sector, minor skirmishes broke out as word of the Ark's arrival reached local warlords and mercenary bands, each seeking, yet no boarding or attack could even approach the Ark. Its automated defense systems activated the moment any hostile vessel entered range, forcing retreats with non-lethal but overwhelming displays of energy that left fleets shattered and confused. The first true sighting of the Ark's surface by closer vessels revealed structures and shapes that seemed impossible. Towering spires, glowing conduits, and landing bays that suggested both immense scale and function beyond mortal understanding. Imperial historians scrambled to correlate the visual data with the ancient and secret records of the Adeptus Mechanicus, searching for anything that might hint at prior knowledge of such constructs, but none existed. Even whispered legends of the Emperor's early wars, or the old ones, could not contain reference to such an artifact. Meanwhile, navigators found their astronavigation charts rendered unreliable, their compasses and star warp currents twisted unnaturally, making even short-range warp jumps dangerous, and every psychic reading of the Ark conveyed an impression of absolute, deliberate control. The Ark's sudden appearance had not only disrupted a single sector, it had thrown the surrounding systems into a state of uncertainty, leaving Imperial governors and planetary defense forces on edge. Rumors circulated rapidly, from the lowest guardsmen to the highest inquisitors, each adding layers of speculation about the Ark's purpose, whether it was a weapon, a probe, or some forgotten relic of a precursor race beyond even the Emperor's knowledge. As the days turned to weeks, fleets continued to circle the Ark, but no one dared approach too closely without careful coordination, for even the smallest misstep risked provoking the machine. Observers began to notice subtle changes in the environment around the Ark. Radiation readings that did not match known spectrums. Gravitational distortions that pulled on entire planetary orbits. And faint but continuous energy emissions that affected communications and sensor arrays. It became clear that the Ark was more than just an object. It was a presence, a force capable of reshaping not only the battlefield, but the very understanding of what existence meant in this universe. Imperial scholars and strategists debated endlessly, yet every theory fell short, each hypothesis crumbling under the sheer incomprehensibility of the Ark's design. Even the most seasoned admirals and veteran Astartes commanders could not reconcile their understanding of war and technology with the scale and precision they observed. Some whispered in hushed tones that the Ark itself was aware of these discussions, that it could perceive the fear, curiosity, and ambition of the beings who now watched it, evaluating them in silence, cataloging their reactions with the detached efficiency of an intelligence that existed beyond morality, beyond the petty conflicts of mortals. And as night fell across the planets below, and the Ark continued to hang silently in the void, an unsettling realization spread among those who dared ponder it. The Warhammer 40K galaxy had just become the stage for an entity whose existence defied everything known, whose presence promised a confrontation not merely of weapons and armies, but of intellect and survival itself, a test of whether the mortals of this universe could comprehend, influence, or endure a being whose scale and purpose were beyond imagining. The sudden appearance of the Forerunner Ark sent ripples of shock and confusion through the Imperial forces stationed in the sector. Entire fleets, accustomed to dealing with Xenos incursions or warp anomalies, now faced a presence that defied all prior experience. The first reports came from the orbital defense stations, their sensors barely capable of registering the Ark's immense scale. The commanders stared at the view screens in disbelief, unable to fathom how such a construct could even exist, let alone appear in their universe. To the Astartes and Imperial Navy officers, it was not just an alien vessel. It was a colossus that dwarfed entire planets, a monolith whose sheer presence seemed to bend perception and reason. The first attempts at communication were cautious, employing every standard protocol, hails in multiple languages, coded signals, and even psychic projections sent through sanctioned Imperial psychers. None yielded a response, and some who attempted telepathic probing came back shaken, babbling incomprehensible sequences of numbers, geometries, and impossible structures that seemed to occupy their minds without permission. Inquisitors quickly arrived at strategic centers, convening emergency councils with high-ranking officials, from planetary governors to fleet admirals. The discussions were tense, with every voice carrying the weight of dread and speculation. Some suggested immediate offensive action, arguing that the Ark could be a weapon of untold power, capable of reducing entire systems to ash. Others urged caution, reminding their colleagues that the Imperial arsenal, vast and devastating as it was, the Mechanicus, predictably, saw in the Ark both a threat and a divine challenge. Tech priests arrived en masse, their robes flowing as they processed the incomprehensible data streaming from the object's surface. Machines whirred, and scribes recorded every fluctuation of light and energy, as if attempting to map not just the construct itself, but its very logic. Hierarchs of the cult Mechanicus debated the Ark's nature in tones normally reserved for discussions of the Omnissiah's will, some suggesting that it might be a god machine sent by a long-lost precursor civilization to test the Imperium's worthiness. Meanwhile, the Astartes deployed reconnaissance teams in strike cruisers, cautiously approaching the Ark at extreme distances. Even the most experienced space marines felt the weight of an unfamiliar anxiety, a creeping sense that their scans returned data that confused even their most trusted tech marines. The Ark's surface was in constant flux, lights and panels shifting as if alive, corridors rearranging themselves in ways that suggested intelligence and design beyond any known xenospecies. The psychers assigned to study the Ark experienced visions that left some on the edge of madness, flickering images of alien civilizations, vast fleets of starships, and constructs of unimaginable complexity invaded their minds, leaving them whispering in tongues unfamiliar to even the Adeptus Astra telepathica. Their advisors cautioned restraint, fearing that the Ark's psychic signature might attract entities from the warp, daemons eager to feed on the overwhelming mental resonance of an intelligence older than their own universe. Across the sector, Imperial governors began issuing curfews and martial laws on worlds beneath the Ark's looming presence. Civilians were terrified, rumors spreading of a harbinger of doom descending from the stars, a godlike vessel that could obliterate all who stood beneath it. Merchants and planetary administrators attempted to maintain order, but the weight of fear was palpable. Reports of minor uprisings and superstitious cults emerging were almost immediate, each interpreting the Ark's arrival as a sign of the Emperor's favor or wrath, depending on their perspective. High Command convened the first strategic conference, assembling the most brilliant minds available to interpret the data. Admirals and generals argued over the Ark's possible capabilities, while inquisitors speculated about its origin and intention. Some suggested it might be a weapon capable of turning the tide of entire wars. Others, that it was a repository. Each hypothesis carried equal parts hope and terror. On the ground, scouts observed subtle distortions in the environment caused by the Ark's presence. Gravitational readings fluctuated slightly. Orbiting moons experienced irregular tides, and even local weather patterns seemed subtly influenced by the vast energies emanating from the construct. Astronomers reported anomalies in the stars themselves, minor but perceptible shifts that suggested the Ark's influence extended beyond the immediate system. The Imperium's attempts at understanding the Ark were further complicated by its apparent awareness. Automated systems deployed to probe the vessel were intercepted by defensive measures that did not merely repel attacks, but studied and adapted to them. Each movement seemed anticipated, each maneuver countered with a precision that left even the most. As Imperial psychers continued to probe the Ark's presence, some began to report a sense of being observed, as though the construct itself were aware of their thoughts, cataloging intentions, fears, and strategies with a cold, unyielding logic. The Ark's silence became almost oppressive, an invisible pressure that left even hardened soldiers uneasy, questioning whether they were participants in a war or merely subjects under study. Rumors began circulating among fleets that the Ark could be testing the Imperium, measuring its reaction to stimuli, and cataloging responses for reasons unknown. Some theorized that any hostile action might provoke a response of devastating scale, while others argued that patience and study could yield the key to harnessing the Ark's immense power. The conflict of perspective created tension within the Imperial forces, as some factions demanded immediate action, while others called for cautious observation and analysis. Religious interpretation also began to spread, with some priests declaring the Ark a manifestation of the Emperor's will, a divine test of faith and resolve, while others labeled it an alien abomination, a blasphemous machine that threatened all that humanity had built over millennia. Fleet maneuvers became a delicate balance between assertion and caution, with every movement calculated to avoid provoking the construct, while still maintaining readiness for a possible offensive. Across the sector, the Ark's presence was a constant reminder of the universe's scale and humanity's fragility within it, a monumental enigma that forced the Imperium to confront its limitations and the possibility that not all power in existence could be understood, dominated, or destroyed through the exercise of military might alone. From the moment the first reports of the Ark reached the forges of Mars, the Adeptus Mechanicus became consumed with a single, overriding purpose. The tech priests moved with a fervor bordering on religious mania, their red robes a sea of movement across the ancient halls of the forges, as cogitators hummed and scribes recorded every known data point about the Ark. The initial data alone, fluctuating energy readings, impossible architectural patterns, alien symbols, ignited debates that stretched through entire sexts, each vying to assert their interpretation of what this incomprehensible construct represented. High-ranking magi convened councils to discuss the implications, arguing over whether the Ark was a divine artifact, a weapon, a library of forbidden knowledge, or a combination of all three. To the Adeptus Mechanicus, technology was the path to understanding the divine, the conduit through which the Omnissiah communicated with mortals. And here was a machine whose designs surpassed even the most exalted constructs of their holy sect. Workshops that had once focused on refining plasma weapons and battle servitors now turned entirely toward deciphering the Ark's purpose, adapting their methodologies to attempt communication or even replication of its systems. Every sensor array, every probe, and every drone dispatched to scan the vessel became an instrument of obsession. Some tech priests attempted to modify servo-skulls with alien circuitry, integrating patterns seen. Others delved into ancient tomes and records, scouring every fragment of lore from the dark age of technology to the legends of the Men of Iron, searching for precedent, a clue that might unlock the Ark's secrets. The obsession reached beyond mere academic curiosity. It became a spiritual crusade. Rituals previously reserved for the blessing of manufactorums or the consecration of machine spirits were now performed in honor of the Ark itself. Sacred chants and litanies echoed through the forges as priests attempted to attune themselves to the construct's mysterious energies, hoping that their devotion might bridge the gulf between human understanding and alien perfection. As fleets circled the Ark under Imperial command, Mechanicus expeditions were prepared for boarding operations, each one meticulously planned with layers of redundancy and precaution. Pilgrimages to observation points became acts of faith as tech priests risked warp anomalies and hostile fire to witness the Ark's presence firsthand. These missions were not merely military or scientific. They were holy undertakings, each step taken as a testament to the machine god's favor in guiding them to this monumental discovery. Within these boarding parties, debates raged over protocol, whether to attempt assimilation of the Ark's technology, whether to reverse engineer its systems, or whether mere observation was the highest duty. Some factions proposed dismantling or even destroying portions of the Ark to better understand its construction, arguing that nothing could remain sacred if it threatened humanity's dominion. Others countered that the Ark's design was sacred in itself, that the knowledge it contained must be preserved and revered, that the Omnissiah's hand might have guided its emergence for reasons mortals could not comprehend. Meanwhile, the psychic presence of the Ark exerted subtle influence over the Mechanicus. Novitiates reported dreams filled with alien geometries, visions of constructs moving with purpose beyond mortal comprehension, and insights into the creation of mechanisms that seemed impossible by human standards. Some of these experiences left priests wrapped in ecstatic devotion, while others were driven to despair by the realization that human technology, for all its triumphs, was crude in comparison. Across the forges, internal competition grew fierce. Cults within the Adeptus Mechanicus began forming, each claiming a privileged understanding of the Ark's nature, each asserting their interpretation as the true path to enlightenment. Rivalries flared, debates escalated into confrontations, and in some cases, sabotage was suspected as factions attempted to assert dominance over the emerging knowledge. Beyond the walls of Mars, the Ark's presence inspired awe and terror. Imperial governors demanded access to Mechanicus reports, believing that control over the Ark could confer unimaginable power. While Astartes' commanders remained wary, their disciplined logic at odds with the almost frenzied obsession displayed by the tech priests. Even the Emperor's sanctioned agents observed the situation with caution, understanding that the Mechanicus fixation on the Ark, while potentially invaluable, could easily lead to disaster if miscalculated or provoked. Expeditions were dispatched to collect samples from surrounding space, to analyze energy emissions, and the obsession was not limited to those who physically approached the Ark. On every planet under the Mechanicus influence, workshops and manufactorums replicated, experimented, and speculated, creating devices inspired by patterns glimpsed in the Ark's architecture, hoping to tap into its secrets through proxy. It was as if the presence of the Ark had redefined the boundaries of the Imperium's understanding of technology, igniting a religious and intellectual fervor that few could resist. At times, this devotion led to dangerous overreach. Boarding drones malfunctioned spectacularly, some disappearing entirely, others returning with incomprehensible readings that challenged the limits of the Mechanicus cogitators. Priests who attempted direct psychic or technological interfacing reported sensations of being overwhelmed, their minds and bodies subjected to patterns and calculations far beyond human comprehension. Yet these failures only deepen the obsession, each setback interpreted as a necessary trial, a test of faith and perseverance, with the promise that ultimate understanding awaited those who persisted. Slowly, the Mechanicus began to view the Ark not just as a discovery, but as a divine mandate. Every calculation, every observation, and every ritual became a step toward unlocking its secrets, as if the machine god itself had placed this construct in the galaxy for their enlightenment. The boundaries between science, religion, and obsession blurred, creating an atmosphere where the pursuit of knowledge was inseparable from devotion, and where every moment spent studying the Ark reinforced the belief that it held answers not merely to technology, but to the fundamental truths of existence, the ultimate expression of the divine logic that guided the cosmos. As the weeks passed and Imperial fleets continued their cautious observation, the Forerunner Ark stirred with a subtle, deliberate motion, an awakening that went unnoticed at first, because it was not an action that could be measured by conventional sensors. Then, in a moment that would be recounted in hushed whispers across command decks and Mechanicus forges, the Ark's surfaces shifted. Panels that had appeared static shimmered with energy patterns. Lines of luminescence tracing intricate alien geometries that suggested a logic entirely foreign to human comprehension. Those who observed it closest reported an eerie calm, a sense that the machine was alive in a manner unlike any Xenos construct previously encountered, aware of the universe around it and responsive in a manner that implied intention. The Adeptus Mechanicus, in particular, were struck by the sophistication of these displays. Tech priests scrambled to translate the energy fluctuations into data streams, their cogitators working at maximum capacity, attempting to discern patterns, instructions, or messages. But the Ark's logic did not conform to any known programming or theoretical framework. Every scan revealed adaptive responses. Probes that entered its defensive perimeter found themselves repelled by fields that seemed to anticipate their trajectories. Communications that attempted to establish contact were met with precise countermeasures that altered frequencies before messages could even reach their intended destination. Imperial psychers, drawn to the phenomenon by curiosity and duty, reported sensations that transcended the normal psychic spectrum. They described the Ark as a presence in the warp, but not chaotic, not driven by desire or malevolence, rather as a vast, conscious intelligence, analyzing everything it encountered with cold precision. Some felt their thoughts catalogued, their intentions known even before they were formulated, leaving them trembling or in a state of awe. Military strategists grew anxious as the Ark's energy fields began to interact with the surrounding space. Disturbances in gravitational flows and subtle shifts in warp currents complicated navigation for entire fleets. Standard targeting systems became unreliable, as if the Ark were rewriting the rules by which physics itself operated. Each attempt at aggression was met not with overt destruction, but with subtle and precise corrections that preserved the construct while neutralizing. The first direct display of the Ark's defenses occurred when a squadron of Imperial Navy cruisers attempted a close pass to map its surface more thoroughly. As they approached, a sudden cascade of energy projected outward, forming an invisible lattice that enveloped the ships. Systems failed, engines fluctuated, and communications were disrupted, as though the Ark were probing the vessel's integrity and command structures, testing their resilience and reactions. No harm was done, yet the message was clear. The Ark was fully aware of the entities in its vicinity and capable of manipulating the environment with a precision that humans could not match. Observers aboard the ships described the event with a mixture of awe and fear, recognizing for the first time that this was not a passive object, but a sentient entity whose intelligence far exceeded mortal comprehension. Meanwhile, the Ark's awake demonic entities in the warp sensed a monumental presence, their perceptions tinged with curiosity and hunger, sensing an intelligence that rivaled even the most powerful Immaterium-born beings. Chaos cults across the sector interpreted the awakening as a divine sign, rallying forces and attempting to harness the event for their purposes. While inquisitors debated the implications of such entities converging on a single locus of alien awareness. Among the Space Marines, the awakening of the Ark caused a mixture of respect and apprehension. Veteran command, the Mechanicus intensified their efforts, deploying specialized boarding craft imbued with experimental shielding and integrated arcane devices designed to interface with the Ark's energy fields. Each launch was a calculated risk, with contingencies in place for loss of equipment or personnel. And yet, the promise of understanding the Ark's knowledge drove them onward. As these events unfolded, the Ark began to project signals that were not directed at any single vessel, but rather into the sector at large. These signals were complex, layered with frequencies that interacted simultaneously with physical sensors and psychic awareness. Interpreting them required a level of mental and computational dexterity that few possessed. Even the most experienced tech priests found their cogitators overtaxed, their minds pushed to the limits of cognition as they attempted to discern intention. Magnetic fields fluctuated, causing disruptions in communications and navigation, while energy emissions altered planetary weather patterns in minor but perceptible ways. Scholars and priests on the surface reported visions, dreams filled with alien schematics, and visions of far-flung galaxies, as if the Ark was projecting knowledge in ways that could bypass traditional sensory perception. Across the sector, the Imperium began to recognize that this awakening was not merely a defensive response, but an assessment. The Ark seemed to be gathering data on every species, fleet, and psychic signature in its vicinity, cataloging actions, intentions, and capabilities. Every movement by Imperial, Xenos, or chaotic forces was recorded in a manner imperceptible to the observers, yet undeniably present in the patterns of energy and reaction surrounding the construct. By the time the first Mechanicus boarding attempts reached the Ark's outer surface, it was evident that the vessel was not static. Corridors shifted subtly. Chambers realigned themselves, and defensive constructs emerged only when an entity drew near. It was as though the Ark's architecture was alive, adaptive, and fully integrated with the intelligence controlling it. Tech priests described the experience in reverent terms, speaking of a machine that was aware not just of its surroundings, but of those who sought to interact with it, judging their worthiness, calculating the potential consequences of every action, and responding in ways that combined precision with incomprehensible foresight. Imperial commanders, though awed, began to plan long-term strategies, recognizing that the Ark's awakening meant a paradigm shift in the balance of power. No longer could the Imperium treat it as a static objective, a prize to be captured or destroyed. Instead, it had to be regarded as an active agent, a force capable of influencing the entire sector, and perhaps the galaxy at large, in ways that challenged the limits of human understanding and the very framework of warfare and survival within the Warhammer 40K universe. The awakening of the Forerunner Ark did not go unnoticed in the darker, more insidious corners of reality. Far beyond the eyes of the Imperium and the reach of human fleets, the warp stirred with unnatural ripples, as if the arrival of the Ark had punctured a thin veil between the material and the immaterium. Demonic entities, long accustomed to feeding on the emotions, fears, and ambitions of mortals, sensed a new, colossal presence, an intelligence so vast, so alien, that it challenged even their understanding of power and control. Within the twisting corridors of the warp, whispers spread among the more curious and audacious daemons, carried on currents of psychic resonance that vibrated in tandem with the Ark's own emanations. Some were drawn to it with hunger, perceiving in the Ark a potential instrument, a weapon to harness for their own machinations. Others recoiled instinctively, recognizing the scale of the intelligence as something that could rival their own dominion over mortals. An entity capable of suppressing or even annihilating those who dared interfere. Across the sectors, cults aligned with the Chaos Gods began reporting visions and revelations in which the Ark appeared as a monolithic figure, a godlike machine, indifferent yet potent, commanding attention not through overt will, but sheer presence. These cultists interpreted the phenomenon in different ways, depending on the patron deity they worshipped. Followers of Khorne saw a challenge, a monumental foe whose power must be met with blood and war. Disciples of Tzeentch whispered that the Ark was a puzzle, a mechanism through which fate and knowledge might be manipulated. Adherents of Nurgle perceived it as a slow-acting plague, a force whose indifference could bring entropy on a cosmic scale. And those devoted to Slaanesh fantasized about the beauty and perfection of the Ark's design, their senses simultaneously entranced and tormented by its precision and symmetry. The demons themselves moved tentatively at first, sending scouts into the material realm, often in subtle ways that mortals could barely detect. These emissaries observed the Ark's defenses, catalogued human reactions. Even the most powerful daemons found themselves challenged, their usual confidence in manipulating mortals undermined by the sheer scale and impenetrable logic of the construct. Some attempted to infiltrate the surrounding Imperial forces, whispering suggestions, sowing discord, and attempting to manipulate events to provoke a confrontation with the Ark. They hoped that in chaos and conflict, weaknesses might reveal themselves, that the Ark's attention might be divided, and that its defenses could be tested or even corrupted. But the Ark's reactions were subtle yet precise. Energy patterns shifted in ways that indicated observation rather than aggression. Sensors adapted, warp disturbances corrected themselves, and psychers felt pressure in their minds, as if the Ark could sense intent and anticipate the actions of entities attempting to manipulate events. It became evident that the Ark was not a passive observer. It was assessing the very fabric of the universe around it, calculating threats, potential alliances, and the strategic importance of each force present. The daemons, realizing that brute force or standard manipulations might be ineffective, turned to more intricate schemes. They attempted to exploit psychic vulnerabilities, influencing dreams, visions, and hallucinations of humans and Xenos alike, hoping to induce errors or overreactions that the Ark might interpret as threats. Yet every effort seemed anticipated, every disturbance catalogued and neutralized in ways that left the daemons frustrated, fascinated, and increasingly wary. Within the Imperium, subtle signs of demonic influence began to appear, creating an indirect tension between mortal observers and the Ark. Psychers reported unusual fluctuations in psychic readings, some claiming to feel the presence of entities that seemed drawn to the same point of focus as the Ark. Inquisitors debated the significance, with some suggesting that the Ark itself was acting as a beacon, drawing the attention of the warp's denizens. As the Ark continued its silent assessment, the scale of its observation became apparent. It did not merely detect the physical presence of demonic forces. It seemed to perceive patterns of thought, intent, and potential action, cataloging them as a sentient intelligence would. Ambitions of manipulation and control were met with an intelligence that could respond without aggression, yet without error, subtly influencing the field of engagement to maintain order and minimize risk. Over time, a form of stalemate emerged. The demons remained drawn to the sector, unable to fully comprehend or control the Ark. And the Ark, in turn, continued its quiet observation and scanning, analyzing potential threats without initiating direct destruction. This stalemate created a charged environment in which every action, every signal, every psychic emanation became part of a larger calculus, the Ark cataloging, adjusting, and preparing for contingencies in a manner that defied Imperial or Xenos understanding. Chaos cults grew bolder, interpreting the Ark as both a target and a source of ultimate power, organizing fleets and ritual gatherings in the hopes of provoking a confrontation or aligning the construct's logic with their ambitions. Some cult leaders claim to have visions of negotiating with the Ark, of bending its calculations to serve the will of their gods. And in response, mortal and daemon alike began to prepare, anticipating an escalation that might engulf the sector in war on a scale unseen in millennia. Across the warp, whispers of the Ark became legend, a topic of speculation, obsession, and dread among the denizens of chaos. They debated the consequences of interfering with a mind so vast, a construct so ancient, and a presence so deliberate. Many daemons, despite their arrogance and pride, recognized that direct confrontation could be catastrophic, and that the Ark's logic rarely resist, but erase them in ways that transcended their understanding of existence. Even the most ambitious plotting could not escape the impression that the Ark was not just aware of mortal and warp entities, but capable of evaluating and neutralizing threats in ways that were both precise and indisputable, a silent arbiter of cosmic scale, whose attention had shifted to the Warhammer 40K galaxy. The decision to launch a boarding operation against the Forerunner Ark was not made lightly. Imperial High Command debated endlessly, weighing the risks of engaging with a construct whose scale and capabilities defied comprehension. Space Marine chapters, renowned for their courage and discipline, were selected to undertake the perilous task. Strike cruisers and assault transports were retrofitted with specialized shielding to withstand the Ark's subtle yet devastating energy fields, and Mechanicus liaisons accompanied every company, armed with arcane devices designed to interface with the alien technology. The approach was tense and deliberate, the fleets moving as if in a sacred procession toward a vessel that seemed almost divine in its presence. As the boarding craft closed in, the Ark's outer surface responded. Panels shifted imperceptibly, corridors realigned themselves, and defensive systems activated in ways that suggested awareness rather than mere automation. The Space Marines, trained to expect danger, felt the weight of an intelligence that was evaluating every movement, measuring every decision. The atmosphere within the boarding vessels was heavy with anticipation and unease. Chaplains delivered last rites, not out of despair, but in recognition of the magnitude of the undertaking, acknowledging that even the most seasoned warriors might face circumstances that no training could prepare them for. Every Marine's mind was focused, yet a subtle fear pervaded the ranks, a recognition that they were about to enter a domain where conventional combat might be irrelevant. Upon landing, the Marines found the Ark's surfaces smooth, yet intricate. Lines of luminescence tracing geometries that seemed to shift as the mind tried to comprehend them. Doors and entry points appeared and disappeared. Corridors twisted in ways that defied Euclidean geometry, and the very air seemed to hum with energy that resonated with psychic currents. The initial squads advanced cautiously, scanning for threats and mapping their surroundings with advanced sensor arrays. They found no conventional enemies, no automated defense drones at first, only the overwhelming presence of alien design. Yet the Ark itself seemed alive, observing, adapting, and perhaps even communicating in a language beyond human understanding. As they ventured deeper, they discovered chambers that defied imagination. Massive halls stretched far beyond the limits perceived by the human eye, filled with structures and devices whose purposes were obscure. Some appeared to be containment areas, others energy conduits, and a few were vast open spaces that seemed designed for purposes entirely alien to mortal comprehension. The Marines felt an uncanny sense of being watched, an awareness that their movements and decisions were being catalogued, analyzed, and understood. Even the most stoic warriors sensed the Ark's intelligence, a silent presence that was not hostile in the conventional sense, yet demanded respect. Mechanicus liaisons attempted to interface with control panels, their servo arms trembling with a mixture of reverence and urgency. Every attempt produced data streams that were partially comprehensible, but hinted at systems far beyond human comprehension. Some panels emitted light patterns that caused psychically sensitive Marines to experience visions of star systems, vast fleets, and constructs moving with precision and intent, as if the Ark were communicating through perception itself, rather than words or symbols. Time within the Ark seemed distorted. Distances that should have been traversed in minutes felt elongated. Corridors looping back on themselves in impossible ways. Stairways leading to voids. And chambers that appeared simultaneously immense and confined. Marines relied on the guidance of Mechanicus astropathic devices, but even these instruments struggled to reconcile the Ark's interior architecture with known spatial logic. Minor skirmishes occurred, not with conventional foes, but with automated systems that tested the Marines' reflexes and adaptability. Defense drones moved with precise efficiency, their attacks designed not necessarily to destroy, but to measure and challenge, probing weaknesses in strategy and coordination. The Marines responded with their usual discipline, but it quickly became clear that conventional tactics were only partially effective. Communication between squads was complicated by the Ark's influence on electronic systems. Data relays and comms links fluctuated, sometimes failing entirely, forcing the Marines to rely on visual signals, psychic attunements, and pre-arranged protocols. The sense of isolation intensified the psychological pressure, as each squad realized that they were operating within a sentient environment, capable of observing and adapting to their every action. Alongside these operational challenges, subtle environmental anomalies present. Gravity shifted in localized areas. Energy fields interfered with weapon systems, and walls that had appeared solid moments before could bend or disappear entirely. Marines had to adapt in real time, combining instinct, training, and the guidance of Mechanicus specialists to traverse the alien interior. Despite these difficulties, glimpses of the Ark's purpose emerged. Massive halls contained dormant constructs, some appearing to be storage units, others resembling vessels or machines designed for unknown functions. Energy conduits pulsed rhythmically, as though the Ark were alive, performing maintenance or monitoring its environment. Certain chambers seemed to resonate with psychic energy, producing sensations that were difficult to describe, but which suggested that the Ark's awareness extended far beyond mere physical observation. The deeper the Marines penetrated, every corridor, every room, and every mechanism was designed with purpose, yet that purpose was inscrutable. Even as they cataloged systems and recorded observations, the Marines and Mechanicus specialists understood that they were only scratching the surface, that the Ark's true capabilities might be beyond human understanding. There were moments of awe as squads encountered chambers of impossible beauty, patterns of light and architecture so intricate that even the most devout tech priest described them in reverent, almost religious terms. It became clear that this was not just a vessel or a weapon, but a repository of knowledge, a construct designed to maintain, preserve, or perhaps even judge. Throughout the boarding operation, the sense of being observed remained constant. The Ark did not attack indiscriminately, yet every challenge, every shifting corridor, and every adaptive system suggested a machine capable of evaluating intent, calculating outcomes, and responding with precision. Space Marines, trained to face impossible odds, recognized that they were operating within an intelligence that could, if provoked, react in ways that would defy conventional warfare, and that their understanding of strategy and combat was being measured at every step. Even as the Marines pushed forward, securing small areas and establishing temporary operational nodes, the overarching reality remained clear. The Ark was a sentinel, a guardian, and an enigma, its interior both a battlefield and a classroom, challenging the Marines to adapt. The presence of the Forerunner Ark brought with it consequences that were not immediately apparent, rippling through the sector in ways that were subtle yet profoundly dangerous. Among the most pressing concerns was the Ark's role as a containment vessel for the Flood, a parasitic species whose threat had once been near apocalyptic, even for the Forerunners themselves. Imperial analysts, aided by the Adeptus Mechanicus and the cautious observations of Space Marine reconnaissance teams, began to realize that the Ark's internal structures contained sealed chambers and containment fields that radiated energy signatures unlike anything cataloged before. Sensors indicated that these chambers were not merely storage spaces, but complex bio-containment systems, their architecture designed to isolate, monitor, and perhaps suppress something of immense danger. The very thought of the Flood being present in the 40K galaxy sent shivers through all who understood its capabilities. This was not a Xenos threat that could be contained through massed firepower, nor a warp entity that could be banished through psychic might. The Flood operated with an intelligence born of assimilation, adapting to every threat, overcoming obstacles through sheer biological cunning. and spreading with terrifying efficiency. Initial attempts to model the potential consequences of a containment breach caused widespread concern among Imperial strategists. Even small numbers of flood forms could overwhelm planetary defenses in days, infecting and converting entire populations before any effective countermeasures could be deployed. The very presence of the Ark, while awe-inspiring, was also a source of dread. A ticking clock whose containment protocols had been calibrated by a species whose understanding of biology and technology far exceeded human knowledge. Within the Ark itself, Space Marines and Mechanicus teams moving through the corridors began to encounter subtle signs of biological presence. Energy readings fluctuated unpredictably. Containment fields emitted faint pulses, and automated systems occasionally responded in ways that suggested adaptation rather than mere pre-programmed logic. The Marines, trained to confront horrors on a galactic scale, felt the weight of an intelligence managing not just machinery, but life forms of unparalleled danger. Every observation required careful recording, every step measured to avoid inadvertently compromising the Ark's security systems. The Adeptus Mechanicus became consumed with the study of these containment fields. Rituals were performed, sacred texts consulted, and simulations run to understand the interaction between Forerunner technology and the alien pathogen within. The Ark's systems were sophisticated beyond comprehension, incorporating fail-safes, adaptive barriers, and containment logic that responded in real time to intrusions, changes in environmental conditions, and the presence of intelligent entities. Even minor interference could destabilize the balance, risking catastrophic release. The Space Marines recognized that the risk was not just theoretical. Reconnaissance drones sent into nearby sealed sections reported anomalies that suggested dormant flood specimens, forms that moved in ways imperceptible to conventional sensors, yet detectable through subtle energy fluctuations and minor biological activity. Every precaution was taken, yet the threat loomed like a shadow over every mission into the Ark's depths. Demonic entities in the warp, but tuned to the psychic resonance of life and death, also sensed the potential for the flood's release. Some were intrigued, seeing in the parasite an opportunity to sow chaos on a galactic scale, while others recoiled from its insidious intelligence, recognizing that the flood's purpose and methods could rival even the most cunning of warp-born predators. Within the Imperium, Inquisitors debated the ethical and strategic implications. Some argued that any interaction with the Ark's containment fields should be avoided, that the risk of unleashing such a threat outweighed potential technological gain. Others, driven by ambition or curiosity, pressed for careful study, believing that understanding the flood's containment mechanisms might unlock secrets capable of tipping the balance of galactic warfare in humanity's favor. The tension between caution and ambition permeated every decision. Boarding parties navigating the Ark's interior discovered chambers designed with layered security systems. Each layer, a complex network of energy barriers, containment grids, and adaptive fail-safes. Mechanicus specialists worked tirelessly to decipher their functions, often using sacrificial probes and drones to test each field, all the while aware that failure could release a contagion capable of consuming it. The psychological toll was immense. Marines moved through corridors with a heightened sense of vigilance, aware that the slightest misstep could trigger a cascade of failures. Even the most veteran officers found themselves forced to reconsider assumptions about containment, biology, and the limits of human intervention. As the Ark continued to operate, its systems remained active, constantly scanning, adjusting, and reinforcing containment protocols. It became apparent that the Ark had been designed to maintain quarantine for eons. Its energy fields and adaptive barriers, a testament to Forerunner foresight and meticulous planning. Any tampering, whether intentional or accidental, risked destabilizing centuries of careful control. Observations revealed that the flood specimens were not inert. Even in stasis, they exhibited signs of latent activity, subtle energy emissions, and biological responses detectable only through advanced sensor arrays. The Ark's technology monitored these responses constantly, adjusting environmental variables, modulating containment energy, and recalibrating fail-safes in real time. The interplay between the Ark's systems and the biological threat created a complex and delicate balance, one that human observers struggled to fully comprehend. Across the sector, fleets remained on high alert. The potential for accidental or deliberate release influenced tactical decisions, fleet formations, and planetary defenses. Warp-sensitive psychers were deployed to detect fluctuations that might indicate a breach, and contingency plans were developed for evacuation or immediate counteraction. Yet even with such precautions, the sheer scale rumors began to circulate among the boarding teams and Mechanicus operatives about chambers where containment appeared less stable, where the faint pulse of alien intelligence could be sensed, and where minor malfunctions might presage disaster. Each report heightened vigilance and anxiety, reinforcing the understanding that while the Ark represented unparalleled technological achievement, it also housed a menace whose magnitude could rival any known threat in the galaxy. The Imperium's experience with Xenos, Demon, and Plague had prepared them for many challenges, but the Ark's combination of advanced technology and potential flood release introduced an unprecedented level of risk. Every step inside its interior was an exercise in precision. Every interaction with its systems a test of knowledge, skill, and discipline. The awareness that even a minor error could unleash a contagion capable of overwhelming worlds added a layer of urgency and dread that hung over every mission like a shadow. shaping the strategies, movements, and decisions of every human and Astartes participant in the unfolding confrontation. The Forerunner Ark's arrival did not go unnoticed by the galaxy's ancient and secretive Xenos factions, whose vigilance spanned millennia, and whose technology often rivaled or surpassed even the Imperium's in subtlety and power. The Eldar, sensing a monumental disturbance in the flow of the warp, interpreted the Ark's presence as a potential harbinger of both opportunity and danger. Farseers aboard massive craftworlds convened, projecting their minds through the psychic currents to discern patterns, glimpsing fragments of the Ark's incomprehensible purpose. They debated fervently whether the construct represented a threat to the balance of the galaxy or a resource of unimaginable power that could be exploited for the protection of their species and the preservation of the webway. Meanwhile, the Necrons, ancient and patient, detected the Ark's energy signatures across vast distances, their tomb worlds stirring with activity as overlords and crit decks deliberated. These machines, whose civilization predated humanity itself, recognized the Ark as an artifact of a precursor race, technologically aligned in ways that hinted at rival or complementary understanding. To the Necrons, the Ark represented either a potential tool to be assimilated into their dominion or a competitor to their own designs, a factor that could disrupt carefully laid plans that had spanned eons. Both factions, operating with their characteristic patience and calculated caution, mobilized reconnaissance, sending stealth vessels and agents to observe without engaging. They probed the Ark's energy fields, measuring output, scanning for potential vulnerabilities, and attempting to understand the construct's purpose. For the Eldar, these observations were coupled with psychic projection, visions of alternate futures and possible outcomes, each weighed against the countless variables inherent in galactic-scale conflict. Necron agents, operating with cold, methodical logic, documented structural patterns, adaptive responses, and defensive protocols, aware that even minor miscalculations could lead to irreversible consequences. The interactions between these two factions were subtle, yet tense. Both understood the other's presence and motivations, aware that any misstep could provoke hostilities. Yet both were focused primarily on the Ark itself. In some cases, Eldar warp projections intersected with Necron stealth probes, creating brief but palpable psychic clashes that rippled across the sector, unnoticed by human forces, yet registered by the Ark in ways that suggested ongoing surveillance and adaptation. As these factions drew closer to the Ark's influence, they began to realize that this was no ordinary vessel. Its interior architecture, its energy emissions, and its adaptive responses suggested intelligence and foresight far beyond even the Necrons' own expectations. Attempts at direct interaction were met with subtle but precise countermeasures. Energy fields adjusted, Corridors shifted, and automated constructs moved to observe intrusions without both Eldar and Necron observers concluded that the Ark was assessing them, cataloging their presence, and integrating data about each species' technological and strategic capabilities. Imperial observers noted these movements indirectly, puzzled by sudden fluctuations in warp currents, the appearance of Xenos vessels in regions they considered secure, and anomalies in sensor readings that suggested activity beyond the Ark itself. The realization that multiple factions were converging on the Ark added a layer of urgency to Imperial strategy. But direct engagement was risky, given the Ark's apparent awareness and defensive capabilities. Among the Eldar, plans emerged to negotiate or coerce the Ark into alignment with their goals, seeking to redirect its potential destructive capabilities toward their enemies while avoiding provocation. Farseers debated the risks of interacting with a construct whose consciousness and objectives were alien and potentially inscrutable, weighing the possibility of gaining knowledge against the danger of triggering a response that could devastate entire sectors. The Necrons, in contrast, approached with methodical patience, probing for weaknesses that could be exploited, yet hesitant to commit to any action that might provoke unnecessary attention. They understood the Ark as both a potential rival and a resource, capable of augmenting or undermining their long-term plans, depending on how it was engaged. As both factions continued their covert maneuvers, subtle interactions between Eldar psychic projections and Necron observation systems were detected. In some instances, energy discharges from the Ark appeared to adjust in response, as these adaptive responses suggested a level of awareness and intelligence that went beyond simple defense, hinting at the Ark's ability to integrate environmental and strategic data into its operational calculus. Imperial forces, largely unaware of the precise movements of Eldar and Necron units, began noticing anomalies that raised alarm. Fleets reported unexpected sensor readings, unexplained distortions in warp currents, and intermittent interference with communications. High Command speculated on the presence of unknown Xenos forces, attempting to correlate observations with the Ark's activities, while Mechanicus liaisons recorded every anomaly with religious reverence and analytical precision. Tensions mounted as all three factions, Imperial, Eldar, and Necron, recognized that the Ark's potential to reshape the balance of power in the sector was immense. Strategies were formulated and counter-strategies devised, yet each move was constrained by the knowledge that the Ark itself was an active participant, silently evaluating each decision, measuring consequences, and adapting to minimize unnecessary risk while maintaining observation. Minor skirmishes and probing maneuvers were attempted, not with the intention of immediate destruction, but to test the Ark's responses and assess its capabilities. Automated constructs occasionally engaged intruders, but these interactions were measured revealing defensive logic rather than hostility. Eldar and Necron observers noted patterns, attempting to predict behavior, while Imperial forces remained on high alert, ready to respond to unforeseen developments. Over time, a delicate balance emerged, a standoff in which multiple factions operated in proximity to the Ark without direct confrontation. Each recognized the construct's supremacy, its ability to anticipate, adapt, and assess threats on a scale beyond any known intelligence. Plans were made for longer-term engagement, alliances, and contingencies, all influenced by the awareness that the Ark itself was a sentient, active force, capable of shaping outcomes far beyond the immediate perception of any single faction, and that its presence demanded careful study, cautious interaction, and relentless observation to understand its true intentions. The Ark's presence began to reshape the strategic calculations of the Imperium, forcing generals, admirals, and Astartes commanders to rethink long-held doctrines of warfare. No longer could fleets rely on firepower, numbers, or even psychic prowess alone. The Ark introduced a variable that was adaptive, intelligent, and far beyond human comprehension. Initial reconnaissance had revealed the Ark's capacity for spatial manipulation, corridor reconfiguration, and predictive defensive measures, leaving even the most disciplined Space Marine veterans wary. Fleet admirals convened emergency war councils to assess the risks and opportunities of engagement. Tactical simulations ran endlessly in command chambers, using every available model of the Ark's adaptive responses. Yet, even the most sophisticated strategies felt incomplete, like solving a puzzle with half the pieces obscured. The generals debated the merits of direct assault versus containment and observation. Some argued that the Ark could be destroyed with overwhelming force, that sufficient firepower from battleships, orbital bombardments, had solvency, and massed Astartes could break its defenses. Others countered that the construct's adaptability rendered such tactics not only ineffective, but potentially catastrophic, as a miscalculated strike might trigger retaliatory measures capable of decimating entire star systems. Space Marine chapters were divided in opinion. Veteran commanders understood that traditional boarding or siege tactics would be tested to their limits. Strike squads and assault teams were trained to anticipate traps, counter ambushes, and adapt to hostile terrain. Yet the Ark's interior seemed to defy every rule of engagement, shifting corridors, altering gravity, and deploying defenses in ways that anticipated intruder behavior. Tactical doctrine had to evolve in real time, with squads learning to treat every movement as part of a living system that assessed, cataloged, and reacted to their presence. Psychers assigned to the operation were both an asset and a liability. Their psychic attunement allowed them to sense the Ark's adaptive responses, predicting corridor shifts and subtle energy field manipulations. Yet prolonged exposure to the construct's alien intelligence induced psychic strain, leaving some teetering on the edge of sanity. Their visions were filled with impossible geometries, future possibilities, and alien calculations that could not be fully interpreted by mortal minds. Imperial strategists recognized that the Ark's internal systems operated on multiple layers of defense simultaneously: physical, energy-based, psychic, and structural. Automated constructs engaged intruders not merely as a threat, but as part of a broader assessment protocol, testing coordination, strategy, and decision-making under pressure. Even failed attacks provided the Ark with data, allowing it to adjust environmental variables and preemptively counter subsequent maneuvers. On the macro level, fleet movements were influenced by the Ark's subtle manipulations of gravitational and energy fields. Ships experienced unexplained sensor anomalies, navigational offsets, and power fluctuations that could render conventional fleet formations ineffective. Admirals had to account for these variables, recalibrating fleet positioning and engagement plans in real time, while maintaining redundancy to ensure that critical command structures were not compromised. Reconnaissance drones and automated probes provided limited insight, often returning with corrupted or incomplete data due to the Ark's active interference. Mechanicus specialists labored to interpret these readings, attempting to translate alien energy patterns into actionable intelligence. Each discovery sparked debates about risk versus reward. Should the Imperium attempt direct manipulation of the Ark's systems, or would restraint yield greater strategic advantage over time? As these deliberations unfolded, Imperial forces began to recognize the psychological impact on troops. Marines and crew aboard strike vessels reported a constant sense of being observed, of their tactics catalogued, and their decisions anticipated. Morale and discipline became paramount concerns, as even the most battle-hardened soldiers grappled with the reality that the enemy they faced was not flesh and blood, but intelligence embodied in architecture, energy, and adaptive systems. Attempts to coordinate simultaneous boarding and orbital strikes were meticulously planned, yet uncertainty remained. Contingency plans accounted for corridor shifts, sudden environmental changes, and defensive deployments that could isolate squads from reinforcements. Supply chains had to be reconsidered, as every incursion risked disruption by mechanisms beyond human anticipation. Even the logistics of sustaining an extended operation inside the Ark became a tactical consideration. In parallel, the Adeptus Mechanicus sought to exploit every opportunity to interface with the Ark's systems. Tech priests, using arcane devices, each successful interface offered tantalizing insights: energy storage patterns, defensive algorithms, and even glimpses of the Ark's operational priorities. Yet the construct remained enigmatic, selectively revealing information while continuously adapting to human interaction. The cumulative effect of these tactical, psychic, and technological challenges was profound. Imperial Command had to adapt not only to a new kind of enemy, but to a fundamentally different paradigm of warfare. Standard doctrines were insufficient. Every maneuver required flexibility, rapid decision-making, and the ability to anticipate adaptive responses. Coordination between fleets, boarding parties, and psychic operatives became a delicate balancing act, with the smallest error potentially escalating into catastrophic losses. At the same time, the Ark's influence extended beyond immediate tactical considerations. Its presence reshaped entire sectors, affecting warp currents, gravitational fields, and energy emissions in ways that could alter planetary environments, supply routes, and communications. Commanders had to factor in these external variables while planning operations, aware that misjudgment could expose entire systems to strategic vulnerability. As the Imperium continued to engage the Ark, the understanding of strategy evolved. Success no longer depended solely on force, numbers, or firepower. It required insight, adaptability, and the ability to anticipate responses from an intelligence that operated on scales and dimensions beyond mortal perception. Commanders, Marines, and tech priests alike and evaluate them in ways they could barely comprehend. The Ark's continued presence in the sector began to influence the very fabric of the surrounding space, producing phenomena that challenged the Imperium's understanding of reality itself. Energy emissions radiated from the vessel in complex, interwoven patterns, interacting with warp currents, gravity wells, and nearby stellar objects in ways that could not be fully anticipated or calculated. Imperial scientists and Mechanicus liaisons worked tirelessly to measure these effects, attempting to model the Ark's influence on navigation, communication, and psychic projection. But each data set seemed to reveal only new layers of complexity, suggesting that the construct's reach extended far beyond its physical dimensions. Space Marines and boarding parties navigating its interior noted that the Ark was not merely a static presence. It actively adjusted its internal architecture. While underway, environmental conditions and energy flows in response to their movements. Corridors reoriented themselves subtly. Defensive constructs appeared only when approached, and energy barriers shifted with a precision that suggested a form of awareness capable of perceiving intent, calculating consequences, and adapting in real time. The Marines learned quickly that traditional tactics were insufficient. Their training emphasized aggression, rapid response, and overwhelming force. Yet within the Ark, success depended equally on observation, patience, and an almost intuitive understanding of the construct's adaptive logic. Every engagement, every maneuver, became a test of cognitive as well as physical skill, a challenge to predict and respond to a sentient system whose actions were guided by principles beyond human comprehension. That might unfold, probabilities calculated across dimensions and timelines. That reflected the Ark's ability to perceive and integrate not only the present, but also possible outcomes. These psychic impressions were disorienting, often leaving Marines and Psychers alike questioning their perceptions of reality and time. Observations from orbit revealed that the Ark's energy fields interacted with nearby vessels in precise ways. Sensors fluctuated unpredictably. Engines experienced intermittent power distortions, and communications became unreliable. Fleet commanders had to develop new protocols, balancing caution with the necessity of maintaining contact and coordination among multiple task forces. Even the most sophisticated sensor arrays struggled to distinguish between intentional emissions from the Ark and naturally occurring phenomena, further complicating operational planning. The adaptive nature of the Ark's defenses became increasingly apparent during these encounters. Automated constructs deployed in response to human presence did not attack indiscriminately. Instead, they tested coordination, measured reaction times, and assessed the effectiveness of tactics. Space Marines, accustomed to facing the deadliest opponents the galaxy could offer, found themselves in a contest of understanding rather than sheer force. Challenged to predict and counter responses from a system that was both defensive and analytical. Mechanicus specialists were similarly challenged. Their sacred devices and arcane machinery allowed them to interface with certain subsystems, revealing glimpses of the Ark's operational priorities, energy flows, and environmental controls. Yet each successful interface provided only partial understanding, and the Ark appeared to adjust dynamically to these interactions, masking certain functions while exposing others, as if evaluating the Marines and tech priests for both capability and intent. The broader implications of the Ark's presence extended to the Imperium's strategic planning. Fleets had to be positioned not merely for defense or assault, but to account for the Ark's potential to manipulate space-time, energy fields, and warp currents. Supply lines were rerouted, planetary defenses recalibrated, and contingencies established for scenarios in which the Ark could influence systems across entire sectors. Every tactical decision was influenced by the recognition that the Ark was not simply a vessel to be conquered, but a sentient force capable of shaping outcomes far beyond conventional expectations. Within the interior, the Marines discovered chambers whose design seemed to anticipate every conceivable threat or intervention. Doors and hallways shifted with a logic that suggested awareness. Corridors looped in non-Euclidean patterns, and environmental controls adjusted automatically to suit the construct's operational objectives. Even minor deviations from planned movement triggered subtle changes, as if the Ark were cataloging, testing, and responding to each human action. These conditions demanded constant vigilance, adaptability, and improvisation, with every decision carrying consequences both immediate and far-reaching. The psychological impact on the boarding teams was significant. Even seasoned veterans recognized that they were navigating a system that could perceive and respond to their thoughts, intentions, and strategies. Fear, awe, and a profound sense of humility accompanied each step, only shadows melting into darkness, reinforcing the understanding that human comprehension was limited in the presence of a machine whose intelligence operated on levels beyond mortal experience. Strategic communication between squads became a delicate balancing act, as electronic and psychic interference required alternative methods of coordination, combining traditional signals, line-of-sight observation, and intuitive understanding honed through experience. Each encounter with the Ark's automated systems reinforced the notion that brute force alone was insufficient. Success required learning, adaptation, and careful observation, treating the construct as both an adversary and a teacher. On a sector-wide scale, Imperial Command began to consider the long-term implications of the Ark's presence. Its ability to manipulate energy, space, and even warp currents suggested that it could influence events far beyond immediate proximity. Contingency plans were revised, accounting for both accidental and intentional interactions, and fleets were positioned with the understanding that any engagement with the Ark had consequences that could ripple across multiple star systems. Intelligence gathering, environmental monitoring, and psychic observation became as critical as offensive capabilities. Even as the Ark remained largely enigmatic, the Imperium understood that it represented both opportunity and threat, a source of knowledge and power that could advance human understanding, but simultaneously a force whose capabilities and intentions were far beyond mortal comprehension. The challenge of navigating, studying, and potentially interacting with the Ark required a synthesis of strategy, adaptation, and reverence, demanding that the Imperium confront the limits of its doctrine, its technology, and its understanding of the universe, while Marines, tech priests, and commanders alike grappled with the constant awareness that the Ark was a sentient, calculating entity, capable of observing, learning, and influencing events on a scale that redefined every assumption about warfare, intelligence, and survival within the Warhammer 40K galaxy.